My wife looked at me with a coldness I had never seen in 40 years of marriage. Her perfectly manicured fingers tapping on my mahogany desk. She laughed a dry, humorless sound that chilled my blood. "You will have to beg me for breakfast money, Walter. Forget about the credit cards. Forget about the bank accounts. From now on, if you want a single cent to buy a cup of coffee, you ask me first. And if I am in a good mood, maybe I will give it to you." That boy, my own flesh, the one I poured everything into, the one whose Duke tuition I signed without blinking, he just sat there with a slow nod, watching his mother like she was something to be proud of. They were certain the game was already over. Welcome back to Dad Revenge. I'm glad you found your way here today. If this is your first time, go ahead and tap subscribe so the next story comes straight to you. Before we get into it, I'd love to know, what is it you're hoping to take away from a story like this one? Drop it in the comments when you're done. One more thing before we begin: this story contains fictional elements added to bring the narrative to life, and any resemblance to real persons or events is purely coincidental. It's the message underneath it all that I hope stays with you. They thought the old man was finished. They had no idea that they had just started a war they could never win. My name is Walter Pruitt. I am 72 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I believed I was the patriarch of a devoted family. I built Pruitt Construction from a single pickup truck and a box of rusty tools into a multi-million-dollar empire. I gave my wife Diane a life of luxury. I handed my son Garrett a career he never earned. I thought I had their respect. I was wrong. If you are new here, take a deep breath. What I am about to share is a nightmare that could befall anyone who places their trust in the wrong hands, even hands that share your blood. It started on a Tuesday that felt like any other. The sun was shining over Houston. I put on my suit, the navy one Diane always said made me look distinguished. I felt good. I felt strong. My morning routine was a simple thing. I would drive over to the Copper Grind, a coffee shop 3 blocks from our estate, order a black coffee and a plain biscuit, and work through the Financial Times. It was my hour. The baristas knew me. They had my order ready before I ever reached the counter. "Good morning, Mr. Pruitt," the young woman at the register said. Her name was Penny. Always smiling, that one. Shot the usual today. "Yes, please, Penny," I said, reaching for my wallet. I felt the familiar heft of the leather. I drew out my American Express Platinum card. It was a symbol of everything I had built. A card with no limit. A card that had covered family trips across Europe, Garrett's tuition at Duke, the diamond necklace Diane wore to charity galas. I tapped it on the reader and waited. Instead of the beep, there came a harsh buzz. The little screen flashed red. Declined. I frowned. "That is strange," I said, forcing a small laugh. "I must have demagnetized it. Could you try again, please?" Penny looked a bit flustered. She tapped it once more. Buzz. Declined. "Mr. Pruitt, the card is showing as inactive," she whispered, trying to spare me the attention of the people behind me. The line was growing. I could feel eyes drilling into my back. Someone sighed impatiently. Heat crept up my face. Shame was a sensation I had not known in decades. I was Walter Pruitt. My bills were settled before they were due. "I apologize," I said, my voice clipped. "Let me try the Visa." I pulled out the backup card, the one tied to the joint operational account. I inserted the chip this time. I watched the screen. Processing, then that same merciless red light. Contact bank, restricted card. My hands began to shake, not from age, but from a sudden cold jolt of adrenaline. This was not possible. There had been over 200,000 in that checking account the day before. I had verified it myself. "Is everything all right, sir?" Penny asked, her voice soft with pity. I despised that look. I did not want pity. I wanted my coffee. I wanted my dignity back. I dug into my pocket and turned up a $20 bill. Cash. Thank God for cash. "Keep the change," I muttered, taking the cup. I walked out without a backward glance, my ears burning hot. I felt like a fraud. I felt like a trespasser in my own life. I sat in my car, a vintage Jaguar I had restored myself. My hands gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I rang the bank. The automated voice was relentlessly cheerful. "We are sorry, but the access code you entered is invalid. Please contact the primary account holder." Primary account holder. That was me. It had always been me. I drove home. Not fast. I drove with a deliberate, unsettling slowness, my mind churning. Identity theft. Had someone drained the accounts overnight? But deep in my gut, I already knew it was no stranger. A stranger takes the money and disappears. A stranger does not change access codes. A stranger does not put a restriction on your cards. This was intimate. I pulled into the driveway of the house I had built 20 years ago. A sprawling estate, beautiful, commanding. It usually filled me with pride. Today it felt like a fortress that had changed its locks. I stepped through the front door. The house was silent. Unusually so. "Diane!" I called out. My voice bounced off the high foyer walls. Nothing. I moved toward my home office. The double oak doors were shut. I turned the handle and pushed them open. What I saw brought me to a dead stop. My son Garrett was seated in my chair. Not just seated, leaned back, feet propped on my desk, wearing one of the Italian suits I had paid for. He was spinning a pen between his fingers. My pen. Diane was settled on the leather sofa across the room, nursing a glass of iced tea. They had the look of people in the middle of a comfortable business meeting. When they glanced up, neither registered surprise. They looked prepared. "What is going on?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "I went to buy a coffee, and both my cards were declined. The bank is telling me I am not the primary account holder." Garrett swung his feet off the desk, but did not rise. He offered me a smile that stopped well short of his eyes. A smile built from condescension. "Oh, that, yes. We were going to tell you at dinner tonight, Dad. Looks like you found out a little ahead of schedule. Chucha, you were going to tell me," I repeated, stepping further into the room. "Tell me what exactly that you robbed me, that you seized my accounts." Diane set her iced tea on the coaster. She smoothed her skirt and regarded me with an expression of perfect, almost bored calm. "Walter, do not be dramatic. Nobody robbed you. We are simply restructuring the family finances. We met with the family attorney this morning." I stared at her. I was not at any meeting with any attorney. "Exactly," Garrett said. "We acted under the power of attorney clause you signed 5 years ago. Remember, after that heart scare, you signed over control in the event you were ever incapacitated or deemed unfit to manage complex assets." "I am not incapacitated," I roared. "I am standing right in front of you. I chaired a board meeting yesterday. I drove myself here. There is nothing wrong with me." Diane exhaled slowly, the way you might with a child mid-tantrum. "Walter, listen to the way you sound right now. You are shouting. Your face is crimson. This is precisely what concerns us. You are getting older. You are becoming erratic. We have been watching it for months. You forget things. You make impulsive decisions." "I do not forget things," I snapped. Garrett rose then. He came around the desk and planted himself in front of me. He had grown taller than me over the years, but he had never once held my gaze like a man always looked away. Not today. Today, those eyes were steady. Dad, hear me out. We are doing this for your own good. The market is volatile. You have been far too conservative with the investments. We want to protect what you built. We moved the liquid assets into a secure trust managed by Diane and me. It is the safer path. The word came out like something sour. You humiliated me in public. You cut me off from my own money. It is not your money anymore, Walter. Diane said, her tone almost gentle. It belongs to the family, and you have spent more than enough of it. All those veteran charity donations, the restoration of that old car, it is bleeding us dry. We are simply stopping the hemorrhage. I looked from my wife to my son. The greed behind their eyes was unmistakable. This had nothing to do with my health, nothing to do with protection. It was about control, plain and absolute. They had been mapping this out for some time. The power of attorney was drawn up for a coma for a stroke, not for a Tuesday morning when I was standing upright and sharp. So, what does my life look like now? I asked, holding myself steady. How do I fill the gas tank? How do I eat? Diane reached into her purse. She produced a card. A generic prepaid debit card, a prepaid Visa card you buy at a drugstore. She dropped it onto the desk. It skated across the mahogany and came to rest near my hand. There is $500 on that, she said. That is your allowance for the week. Should cover your coffee and your little lunches. If you need anything beyond that, submit a request to Garrett, and we will review it. I stared at the cheap plastic card. $500. I had generated millions in revenue the previous year alone. And now I was being handed a weekly allowance like a dependent child. You cannot do this, I said. We already have, Garrett said, settling back into my chair. He looked at home there, far too comfortable. Now, Dad, why don't you go lie down for a while? You look tired. We have a lot of paperwork to get through here. I stood there for a long moment. My heart was hammering against my ribs like something caged. I wanted to overturn the desk. I wanted to seize Garrett by his collar and hurl him through the window. I wanted to bellow until the walls shook. But I studied their faces. I saw the smugness sitting there plain as day. They were expecting me to detonate. They were counting on it. If I turned violent, if I started breaking things, they would dial the police. They would have all the evidence they needed that I was unhinged. Proof that I was exactly the unraveling old man they had been describing. I took a slow, deep breath. I picked up the prepaid card. The cold plastic was thin against my fingers. I looked at Diane. I will not forget this, I said, keeping my voice low. She just laughed. That laugh, the one that told me she believed I was already defeated. Oh, Walter, you will forget. The same way you forget to take your vitamins. Now run along. I turned and walked out of my own office. I walked out of my own house. I settled onto the porch steps. The sun was still out, but everything looked washed of color. They had stripped away my money. They had stripped away my company access. They had stripped away my dignity. But as I sat there with that plastic card in my grip, something cold and certain began to settle deep in my gut. They thought they had cut the head off the lion. They figured I was a toothless old animal who would simply lie down and accept it. They had no idea. I turned the card over in my hand. $500. All right. I could do something with $500. I had started from less than that 40 years ago. If they wanted a contest, a battle of wills and wits, then so be it. I slid the card into my pocket. I did not go lie down. I walked to my car. I needed to make a phone call. But not on my cell phone. They had probably been monitoring that as well. I needed a payphone if one still existed, or a burner. I needed to reach the one man Garrett and Diane had completely overlooked. The one man who knew where every skeleton was buried, because he had stood beside me while we buried them. This was not the end. This was the opening move. And as I turned the ignition, I did not feel like a worn-out old man. I felt like a soldier who had just heard the call to arms. They wanted a war. Fine. I would give them one. But they had made one catastrophic error. They assumed I had laid everything on the table. They assumed they had a full picture, every account, every asset, every company. They assumed wrong. I turned that cheap piece of plastic over in my fingers. It felt weightless, flimsy, almost insulting. Just an hour ago, I had walked through that door as a man of consequence, someone who commanded boardrooms and earned respect. Now I was palming a prepaid card like a kid handed his first bit of pocket money. My thumb moved across the embossed numbers. It was not even personalized. It read, "Valued customer." That was what I had been reduced to inside my own home. A customer, and valued only for as long as I stayed quiet. Diane had her eyes fixed on me, watching for the moment I would fling the card back in her face. Part of me wanted to. God knows I wanted to snap it clean in two and scatter the pieces across the Turkish rug. But I caught the way Garrett's thumb was hovering over his phone screen. He was primed to make a call. The family doctor, maybe. Or the police. They were poised for an eruption, something they could point to as evidence that old Walter had finally cracked. I forced the tension out of my hand. I slipped the card into my pocket right beside the useless platinum American Express. "Thank you, Diane," I said. My voice came out rough but level. "I suppose I should consider myself grateful." "You should," Garrett said, not lifting his eyes from the desk. He was sorting through my quarterly reports documents he had shown zero interest in before today. "We are saving you from yourself, Dad. You do not grasp how complicated the new tax laws have become. The lawyer walked us through everything this morning. If the assets stay in your name, inheritance tax will hollow us out. Moving them into the trust now protects the family legacy. Protects you." I looked at my son. He was reciting terms he had picked up from a textbook, words he understood just well enough to sound convincing. Asset protection. Liability shielding. It carried weight if you did not know what you were listening to. But I knew. I had built this company back when tax codes came off typewriters. I had weathered audits that would have broken lesser men. This had nothing to do with taxes. This was a hostile takeover wrapped in the language of concern. "So this is about taxes," I said, letting the bewilderment show. I scratched my head and let my shoulders drop. I had no idea things had gotten so serious. "It is critical, Walter," Diane said, leaning forward. Her voice softened into that honeyed register she used whenever she needed something. "We are doing this out of love. We do not want you lying awake over bills and statements anymore. You have given everything to this company your whole life. It is time to step back. Let Garrett carry the weight. You focus on enjoying your retirement." She tipped a manicured finger toward my pocket. "There is $500 on that card. That gets you through the week, your breakfasts, your papers. But Walter, I mean it. No expensive cigars, no scotch. We are being careful with money now. The restructuring demands liquidity. We cannot have it draining away. A budget." The woman who had dropped $5,000 on a handbag last month out of sheer boredom was putting me on a budget. A dark, bitter laugh rose up inside me. I pushed it back down. $500, I said slowly. "For the whole week?" "Yes," she said, no softness left in it. And if it runs out, you wait until next Tuesday. It will be good for you, a little discipline. You have been very reckless lately, Walter. Ordering car parts online without telling anyone. Giving money to that shelter without so much as a conversation. That ends now. I dropped my gaze to the floor. I gave them what they wanted, to see a beaten man, a husband with nothing left. Under my breath, I said, I only wanted to finish restoring the Jaguar. The Jaguar is a money pit, Garrett said, glancing up at last. His eyes were flat. We should probably sell it. That garage space would suit my new Maserati just fine. My blood went cold. That Jaguar was the first car I had ever bought with my own earnings. I had rebuilt it piece by piece with my own hands. It was the one place that still felt like mine. Please, I said, letting a slight tremor into my voice. Do not sell it. It is the only thing I still have to keep me busy. Diane waved the idea away like smoke. We will see, Walter. Behave yourself. Keep to the budget. Now go on upstairs. Garrett and I have a call with the investors in 10 minutes. You need to be out of here. The investors. My investors. People I had known for 30 years, men and women who had gripped my hand and looked me square in the eye. Were they part of this as well? Or had Garrett and Diane fed them a carefully constructed story about my declining faculties, had the word gone out that I was no longer fit? I turned to go. My legs felt leaden each step and effort. I reached the door and paused, my hand resting on the brass knob. I glanced back. They had already moved on. Diane was holding her tablet out to Garrett, and they were both laughing quietly, heads together. They looked like partners toasting a clean job. And that was exactly what it was, a heist. They had taken my life right out from under me while I stood there watching. I stepped into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind me. The soft click of the latch landed in the silence like a shot. I stood still for a moment, breathing in the smell of lemon polish and aged wood. This house I had built and filled with a family now felt like a cell, and I was its only inmate. I worked the debit card back out of my pocket. $500. They believed this was my collar and leash. They thought the allowance would keep me compliant, that pulling my credit cards would strip away my power. They were fools. They had forgotten that I started with nothing, that this empire was built with stubbornness and 2 open hands, not with platinum cards. I moved down the long hallway toward the kitchen. I needed quiet. I needed to think. Their story about the taxes was sloppy, full of gaps a careful man could drive a truck through. If they were genuinely restructuring for tax purposes, there would be documents requiring my signature. Notaries. You cannot seize a man's assets without his written consent, not unless you have fabricated it. A chill moved through me. Forgery. Garrett had been mimicking my signature for years. He used to show it off as a party trick when he was still a teenager. Look, Dad, I can sign your checks, he would say. We used to find it funny. I was not finding it funny now. Even with the power of attorney in hand, they would still need medical documentation establishing my incompetence. Where had that come from? Unless a doctor had been bought. The full scope of their betrayal was beginning to land. This was not mere greed, it was a conspiracy. They had been engineering this for months, possibly years. While I was putting in late nights to fund their vacations, they were drawing up a plan to cut me out. While I was showing Garrett how to read a balance sheet, he was learning how to manipulate one. I moved into the kitchen and drew a glass of tap water. I stared at my own reflection caught in the polished granite. I looked old. Gray hair, a face mapped with years, but my eyes were clear. My mind was sharp as ever. They had miscalculated the most essential thing about me. My will. I took a swallow of water. It tasted like metal. Don't spend it on cigars, Diane had told me. A cold, humorless smile crossed my face. I would not waste $1 of this $500 on cigars. I had a far more dangerous use for it. I was going to spend it on the truth. I had to get out of that house, away from their surveillance and their layered deceptions. I checked my watch. Not yet 11:00 in the morning. I had time. I slipped out through the back door, giving the garage a wide berth. If I went anywhere near the Jaguar, Garrett might reappear and start talking about selling it again. And I was not confident I could keep my temper. I went down the driveway, past the trimmed hedges and the stone fountain, out through the front gate and onto the public sidewalk. I walked 3 blocks and found the bus stop. I had not ridden a bus in 20 years, but Walter Pruitt was a man who adjusted to his circumstances. I sat on the bench and waited. When the bus arrived, I paid from the cash in my pocket a few loose bills. I was not touching the debit card yet. They were almost certainly monitoring the transactions. Use that card, and they would know exactly where I was and what I was doing. I rode downtown, lost among the other passengers. Tired nurses, students plugged into headphones, construction workers carrying the day's grime on their clothes. These were my people. This was where I had come from. Garrett and Diane floated through a world of country clubs and private jets. They had lost all sense of what ordinary life looked like. I had not. I stepped off near the financial district. I stood on the corner and looked up at the towers climbing into the overcast sky. Somewhere inside one of those buildings was the truth. I needed to understand precisely what legal mechanism they had used to lock me out. I needed to know whether my name still appeared on the deeds, the titles, the accounts. But I could not go to my usual lawyer. He was the family attorney Diane had mentioned by name. He was theirs now. Walk through his door, and within minutes Garrett's phone would ring. Dad is here. He is asking questions. No. I needed someone outside that circle entirely. Someone who carried a debt to me. Someone who had no patience for crooked dealings. I slipped my hand into my pocket and touched the debit card again. It was a mark of their contempt, but it was also cover. As long as they pictured me shuffling to a park bench to watch the pigeons, they would not be watching the shadows. They thought I had nothing left. They thought I was beaten. They had no idea I was heading into battle. I turned my collar up and struck out toward the older part of the city, toward a modest, worn law office that belonged to a man named Harwick. Nothing polished about him. No lake view, no marble lobby. But he was the sharpest forensic accountant I had ever dealt with, and he nursed a deep, abiding contempt for the large firms. As I walked, Diane's voice played on a loop in my head. Use it for the week. I would make every cent of that $500 count, and I would make them answer for every penny they had taken. The story they had told me was convincing enough, plausible, layered with detail, but it contained one fatal flaw. They had told it to the wrong man. Riding the bus out to the industrial park was its own small humiliation, but I kept my spine straight throughout. I sat wedged between a young mother trying to settle a crying infant and a man who smelled powerfully of old tobacco, turning the prepaid card over in my fingers. When the bus finally lurched to a stop 2 blocks from Pruitt Construction, my knees were stiff, but the resolve in my chest was solid as poured concrete. I walked the path I had driven thousands of times, first in a pickup, then in the Jaguar. The building came into view, 3 stories of brick and glass, sturdy and familiar. The sight of it had always produced something quiet and deep in me. 40 years of labor given physical form. But as my eyes moved to the sign Pruitt Construction, a knot formed in my stomach. The sign had not changed. Everything else had. It felt hostile now. I pushed through the glass double doors, expecting the soft chime that had announced visitors for 2 decades. Silence. The warm oak reception desk I had commissioned 20 years ago was gone, replaced by a slab of cold white marble that looked more like a monument than a welcome. Seated behind it was a young woman I had never laid eyes on. She was working her phone with both thumbs' acrylic nails ticking against the screen. She did not glance up when I came in. "Excuse me," I said, holding my voice steady. She raised a single finger, finished whatever she was typing, then lifted her eyes with the expression of someone interrupted by something beneath their notice. Can I help you, sir? Deliveries go around the back." "I am not a delivery driver," I said, moving closer to the desk. "I am Walter Pruitt. I own this company." She blinked, then tapped something into her computer. "I do not see a Walter Pruitt in the employee directory." "Are you here for a specific person? Do you have an appointment?" My blood came to a slow boil. I had laid the very walls she was sitting between. I had signed the checks that kept the lights on over her head, and she was asking whether I had an appointment. "I do not require an appointment to enter my own building," I said, my voice climbing. "Where is Penny? Where is the receptionist who has been here for 10 years? "Oh, Penny was let go last week," the girl said, folding a piece of gum into her mouth. "Restructuring. I am Kylie. If you do not have an appointment, sir, I am going to have to ask you to wait in the seating area while I call security." Security. We had never had security. We were a family business. I walked past her desk without another word, heading straight down the hallway toward the executive offices. "Sir, you cannot go back there?" Kylie called out, lunging for her phone. I kept moving. The hallway walls used to carry the history of the company, photographs of every project we had ever finished. Bridges, schools, hospitals. The walls were bare now. Abstract prints had gone up in place of the photographs, as if someone had deliberately erased the record of what this place had been built on. I needed to find Clyde. Clyde Abbott had been my chief financial officer for 30 years. No one knew the numbers the way he did except me. He was the company's conscience as much as its accountant. If anyone could tell me what had been done to the bank accounts, it was Clyde. I reached the door at the corridor's end. The brass nameplate reading Clyde Abbott CFO was gone. A handwritten sticky note had been taped in its place, acting finance director. I pushed the door open without knocking. "Clyde, we need to—" I stopped. The man behind the desk was not Clyde. He was young, late 20s at most, hair slicked back, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first vehicle. He was feeding pages into a shredder. The machine was running hard, swallowing paper as fast as his hands could move. He startled badly when I came through the door, the look of someone caught in the act. His palm came down hard on a folder covering whatever lay on top of it. "Who are you?" I said, stepping into the room. "Where is Clyde?" The young man got to his feet and straightened his tie. There was something nervous and weasel-like about the way he held himself. "You must be Mr. Pruitt," he said, manufacturing a smile. "I heard you might be coming by. I am Dylan. Garrett brought me on to modernize the accounts." The word came out of me like something I was spitting out. "Where is Clyde?" Dylan cleared his throat, his eyes skipping toward the door. "Mr. Abbott decided to take an early retirement, effective immediately. He wanted more time with his grandchildren." "That is a lie," I said sharply. "Clyde has no grandchildren. His wife passed 5 years ago, and this job is what keeps him going. He would never walk out in the middle of a fiscal quarter." "What did you people do to him?" I moved around the desk. I wanted to see what was inside that folder he had covered up. I wanted to know what he had been feeding into that shredder. "Sir, please, you are not authorized to be back here," Dylan said, retreating. Those are confidential documents. Confidential from whom? I demanded. I am the man who founded this company. I reached for the folder. Dylan moved to block me, but he had no real weight to put behind it. I pushed past him and snatched the file. Before I could open it, the door crashed open behind me. Dad. What do you think you are doing in here? Garrett. He filled the doorway, his face flushed and tight. His jacket was gone, his hair not quite right. He looked like a man who had been rushing. 2 security guards I had never seen before stood at his back. I turned to face my son, the folder held in my grip. Where is Clyde Garrett? Why is this young man sitting behind his desk? Why is he destroying documents? Garrett crossed the room and pulled the folder out of my hands. He dropped it back on the desk. Clyde was old Dad, same as you. He could not keep pace with the new systems kept making errors. We gave him a fair severance and sent him to Arizona. It was time for new blood. Dylan here is exceptional with international tax law. New blood, I said, glancing at Dylan, who had retreated to a safe position behind Garrett and was allowing himself a small smirk. You mean someone who follows orders without asking questions? Someone who does not push back? Clyde would never have stood by while you blocked my accounts. He would never have let you move assets without my authorization. Garrett dragged a hand through his hair and exhaled. This is precisely the reason you cannot keep coming here, Dad. You are paranoid. You are raising your voice at the staff. You are tearing up the office. Look at Dylan, the man is shaken. I looked at Dylan. He did not appear shaken in the slightest. He looked like a man with a guilty conscience. I want to see the books, Garrett, I said, pulling my voice down. The ledgers for the last 6 months. If everything is as clean as you say, show me, Garrett laughed. Short, dismissive, contemptuous. You would not be able to make sense of them, Dad. It is all digital now, all cloud-based. You can barely find your way around your own email. Go home. Enjoy what you have left of your retirement. Stop trying to manage a world that has moved on without you. Now, I am not leaving without answers, I said, and I meant it. Garrett gave the security guards a nod. Please escort Mr. Pruitt to the exit. Make sure he is not carrying any company property with him. The 2 guards came forward. Big men, their shirts pulling across their shoulders. They did not look at me with respect. They looked at me the way you look at a problem that needs relocating. Mr. Pruitt, if you would come with us, one of them said, reaching for my arm. Take your hands off me, I snapped, stepping back. I fixed my eyes on Garrett. He was already checking his watch, as though having his own father escorted from the building was just another task to tick off before lunch. You are making a serious mistake, Garrett, I said. He did not even look up. Goodbye, Dad. Catch the bus home. It will do you good. I walked out of the office with a guard on each side of me like a man being processed out of somewhere he no longer belonged. We passed open office doors. Employees, people I had hired, people whose children I knew by name, glanced up and then looked quickly away. They were frightened. They understood what they were watching. If the man who had built this place could be marched out, not one of them was safe. We came through to the lobby. Kylie at the reception desk watched the whole thing with a small, satisfied look on her face. The guards held the glass doors open. "Have a nice day, sir," she called after me, lathering each word in sarcasm. I stepped out onto the pavement. The afternoon heat pressed down, but everything inside me had gone cold. The doors sealed shut behind me. I stood looking at the glass, seeing my own reflection staring back. My tie was off-center. My jacket was rumpled. I looked exactly like what they wanted me to look, like a confused old man who had made a scene. But as I straightened my tie and smoothed my jacket back into place, My mind was working cleanly and fast. Clyde had not retired. Clyde had been forced out. You do not remove a loyal CFO of 30 years unless he refuses to cross a line you are determined to cross. And you do not install a nervous young man running a shredder at full speed unless there is something worth destroying. Garrett said I was disrupting the staff, said I was derailing the workflow. He was right about one thing: I was disrupting something. Their plan. I did not walk toward the bus stop. I walked toward a small diner down the block where Clyde used to take his Tuesday lunches. If he had truly gone to Arizona, he would not be there. But if he was scared and staying close, he just might be. Garrett believed he had won that exchange, thought that by having me removed, he had cut off my line of sight. But all he had done was confirm everything I needed to know. The sealed offices, the unfamiliar faces, the shredder running hot. It all pointed to one conclusion. They were not simply draining my accounts. They were using my own company as the instrument of something criminal. I touched the card in my pocket and kept walking. They had thrown me out of my own castle. But I was not finished. I needed to find Clyde, and I already knew what he would tell me when I did. The damage went far deeper than any of them had let on, and I was the only person positioned to cut it out at the root. The sun was low by the time I made my way home from the diner. Long shadows stretching across the lawn I used to cut myself on Saturday mornings. I walked into the house to find the earlier quiet replaced by the sounds of dinner silverware against china, low voices carrying from the dining room. In another life, this had been my favorite hour. The construction sites went quiet, and I could just be a husband, a father, ordinary, at ease. But that life was gone. I was walking into a shark tank. My mother-in-law, Loretta, had taken the head of the table. My seat. She was 80 years old, a woman who had never drawn a paycheck in her life, but held sharp views on everyone else's choices. She was wearing a silk blouse that had probably cost more than my first car. Her hands were stacked with rings, her hair arranged precisely. When I came through the door, she did not offer a greeting. She simply raised one painted eyebrow and regarded me the way you look at a waiter who has brought the wrong dish. "You are late, Walter," she said, her voice thin and cutting. "We started without you. The soup will be cold." I looked around the table. Diane was there with a glass of wine. Garrett was there with his phone. No one looked up. My place had been set, but it was wedged along the side, squeezed between the sideboard and a large flower arrangement. They had physically relocated me from the head of the table. The symbolism required no interpretation. I sat down. The chair was wrong as well, one of the folding chairs we brought out for large gatherings, not my usual high-backed seat. I looked at my plate. A thin piece of dry chicken, some limp salad. Then I looked at the center of the table. A bottle was open and breathing in a crystal decanter. I knew the label without needing to lean forward. Opus 1. A vintage I had been holding for our 50th wedding anniversary. A bottle worth $2,000. I watched Diane pour a full glass for Loretta. The dark red moved slowly through the crystal. "I see we are marking a special occasion," I said, shaking out my napkin. Loretta took a slow sip and closed her eyes with great ceremony. "It is decent," she said. "A touch oaky, but acceptable. Diane, darling, the bread, please." A vein tightened at my temple. Decent. She was drinking something irreplaceable and calling it acceptable. I looked at Diane. "I thought we were operating within a budget," I said, keeping my voice level. "You issued me a prepaid card with $500 for the week. You told me no cigars, no scotch. And yet here we are on a Tuesday with a $2,000 bottle open on the table. Diane set her glass down with a firm clink. "Oh, Walter, do not start this tonight. Loretta is a guest. We can hardly pour her something from a box. And besides, that bottle was already in the cellar. We did not go out and purchase it. It is inventory." "Inventory," I said. "It is my collection. It is the family's collection." Garrett chimed in, his mouth stuffed with potatoes. "Stop being so possessive, Dad. It is unattractive." Loretta let out a short, sharp laugh. "Possessive. That is a funny word coming from you, Walter." She turned those cold, watery eyes on me. "You know you ought to be thanking Diane. She is trying to pull you back from the edge. But all you do is gripe. You walk in here late looking like a vagabond and immediately start counting every penny. It is distinctively lower class." I tightened my grip on the fork. I had paid for Loretta's hip surgery. I had paid for her condo in Arizona. I had covered her late husband's funeral when he died, with nothing but gambling debts to his name. And now I was lower class. "I am only asking for consistency." "Loretta," I said, forcing down a bite of the dry chicken. "If I am being treated like a child on an allowance, I expect the rest of this household to tighten their belts as well." The table went dead quiet. Loretta slowly set her fork down. She looked at Diane, then at Garrett, and finally settled her gaze on me. Pure, unadulterated contempt, that is what I saw. "Tighten our belts," she scoffed. "Walter, take a good look at yourself. You are old. You are useless. You bring nothing to this table anymore. You do not run the company, Garrett does. You do not manage the house, Diane does. You are just another mouth to feed." She took a long sip of my wine, swirling it slowly before swallowing. "You should know your place, Walter," she went on, her voice thick with venom. "In the wild, the old lions get left behind to starve. We are generous enough to keep you under this roof. But do not confuse our charity with equality. You are a guest here now, and a very costly one at that." I looked at Diane. I waited for her to step in. I waited for her to say, "Mom, enough." Walter worked 40 years to put this food on the table. I waited for Garrett to say, "Grandma, that is too far. He is my father." But no one spoke. Diane stared down at her plate, a faint smile at the corner of her mouth, as though she was savoring the sight of me being cut to pieces. Garrett just smirked, shaking his head as if every word was gospel. "Actually," Loretta said, leaning forward, eyes gleaming, "you are not even a guest. A guest gets invited. You are more like a freeloader. Yes, that is exactly the word. A freeloader living off the success of his wife and son. Freeloader." The word hung in the air like something rotten. Diane raised her hand to her mouth to muffle a giggle. Garrett laughed openly. "A freeloader," he repeated. "That is a good one, Grandma. The old man is a freeloader." They laughed. All three of them. Sitting in the house I built, eating the food I bought, drinking the wine I had saved, laughing at me, laughing at the man whose calloused hands had paid for every fork and spoon on that table. Something broke inside me in that moment. Not my heart. The last chain of loyalty I still held for these people. Whatever doubts I had harbored before, whatever thin hope that this was all some misunderstanding or passing madness, it was finished. You do not call the man who feeds you a freeloader unless your soul has gone completely dark. I did not scream. I did not overturn the table. I did not throw the wine in Loretta's face, though the urge rose hot in my chest. Instead, I set my fork and knife carefully across the plate. I blotted my mouth with the linen napkin. I looked at them, truly looked at them. They were ugly. Not in body, perhaps, but their spirits were rotted through. Vultures picking at a living man they had mistaken for a corpse. "No, you are right, Loretta," I said quietly. The laughter dissolved into baffled silence. They had braced for a fight for raised voices. My calm unnerved them. "I am right?" Loretta asked, narrowing her eyes. "Yes," I said. "I have been resting on my laurels. I have let Garrett and Diane carry so much of the load. Perhaps I have grown too comfortable. I suppose I should be grateful you are all willing to manage the complexities of my wealth while I simply sit here." Diane's shoulders dropped, the tension leaving them. She thought I had broken. She thought I was surrendering. "Well, I am glad you finally see it that way, Walter," she said, refilling her glass. "We only want what is best for everyone." I stood up and lifted my plate. "Where are you going?" Garrett asked. "To put my dishes in this dishwasher," I said. Like a good freeloader, I would not want to burden the maid. I walked into the kitchen, and as the swinging door closed at my back, I could hear them pick up their conversation again. Light, easy voices, happy. They were talking about a vacation to Italy in the fall, spending money they believed they had already secured. I stood at the sink, staring at the dirty plate. My reflection gazed back at me from the darkened window. I looked tired, yes, but I also looked dangerous. Loretta had called me an old lion left to starve. She had forgotten one thing. Old lions are the most dangerous of all because they have nothing left to lose and they know how to hunt in the dark. I washed the plate. I dried it. I put it away. Freeloader. I turned the word over in my mind. I would burn it into my brain like a brand. I would run on it like fuel. Every time exhaustion crept in, every time I felt like folding in the days ahead, I would call up Loretta's face and that word. I walked back through the dining room without glancing at any of them. "Good night," I said. "Good night, Walter," Loretta replied, not so much as turning her head. "Try to rise a little earlier tomorrow. Sleeping in is for people who have jobs." I climbed the stairs to the guest room, where I had been sleeping for the past month, ever since Diane declared that my snoring was disturbing her rest. I closed the door and locked it. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out the prepaid debit card. $500. Then I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and drew out a small, crumpled scrap of paper I had plucked from the trash bin at the diner near my office. A phone number, Clyde's sister's number. I had held onto it from a Christmas card years back. A long shot, but the only shot I had. They had called me a freeloader. They believed I was powerless. Tomorrow I would show them what a freeloader was capable of. I would show them that while they were drinking my wine, I had been quietly sharpening my knives. Dinner was over. The game was just beginning. And unlike them, I was not playing for money. I was playing for my life. The house was silent, a rare, heavy silence that felt like the stillness before a storm breaks. Diane had gone to her weekly spa appointment, a $300 massage she insisted was essential for her nerves, paid for no doubt, with funds from accounts I could no longer touch. Garrett had left an hour earlier, his Maserati tires screeching as he tore out of the driveway, almost certainly heading to some lunch meeting, where he would play the part of the brilliant mind behind Pruitt Construction. Loretta was upstairs in her suite, the thick drone of her snoring drifting down the staircase. I stood in the hallway and listened. The grandfather clock I had bought in France 30 years ago ticked its steady rhythm. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It was counting down the time I had left to save my own life. I figured I had a window of maybe 2 hours. Not much, but for a man who had raised skyscrapers on tight deadlines, it was enough. I walked to the double oak doors of my home office. My office, I reminded myself. They had recast it as Garrett's in their minds. He had even installed a new keypad lock on the door handle, a sleek digital unit glowing with soft blue light. He thought he was so clever. He thought a battery-operated gadget would keep me out. He forgot that I was a builder. He forgot that I knew precisely how these door frames were constructed, because I had framed them myself. I did not bother with the keypad. I went to the garage and came back with a thin, flathead screwdriver and a small pry bar. I wedged the screwdriver into the gap between the frame and the latch mechanism and applied steady pressure, feeling the wood yield. I knew exactly where it was weak. One sharp, deliberate thrust, and the latch popped free. The door swung open with a low groan. I stepped inside. The room smelled different. It used to carry the scent of old paper and leather. Now it was Garrett's cloying cologne and the stale sweetness of energy drinks. I crossed to the desk, my mahogany desk. The surface was buried under papers, but I knew the real secrets wouldn't be left sitting in the open. I tried the drawers. Locked. Naturally. I studied the top drawer, the one where I used to store the sensitive contracts. I slid the pry bar beneath the lip and bore down. I no longer cared about the varnish. I no longer cared about the finish. This furniture, this house, wood and stone, nothing more. My legacy was the only thing with any weight left. I leaned into the bar, a sharp crack, the wood splitting, the lock surrendering. I hauled the drawer open. My heart was hammering, not from fear, but from the need to know. I started working through the files. Standard business at first glance. Invoices, payroll records. But there, tucked at the very back beneath a stack of old blueprints, was a thick manila envelope with no label. I opened it. The first document turned my blood to ice. It was a draft for a reverse mortgage on the estate. Not some modest loan, but a full leveraging of the entire property's value. They were cashing out the equity of the home I had planned to leave to my grandchildren, if I ever had any. I turned the page. A timeline was attached. The disbursement date was set for next week. I kept reading. My hands started to tremble, and I had to lay the papers flat on the desk to hold them steady. The next document was a letter from a law firm I had never heard of. The letterhead came from a firm in Panama. Subject: asset liquidation and offshore transfer. I read the words, but my mind pushed back against them at first. It was too evil, too deliberate. The letter laid out a scheme to sell off the heavy machinery of Pruitt Construction, the cranes, the bulldozers, the trucks, to a shell company for a fraction of their worth. That shell company was registered in the Cayman Islands, and the sole beneficiary of that shell company was not the Pruitt Family Trust. It was Garrett Pruitt. They were gutting the company, stripping it down for parts like a stolen car in a chop shop. They never had any intention of running the business. They knew they were in over their heads. They knew they could not land the major contracts. So they had decided to sell off everything I built, stash the cash offshore, and let the company collapse into bankruptcy in the United States. A wave of nausea rolled through me. This was not simply theft. This was murder. They were murdering my reputation. They were murdering the livelihoods of the 200 people who came to work for me every day. And they were doing all of it while I sat one room over, choking down dry chicken and fretting about a $500 allowance. But the worst of it was still waiting at the bottom of the envelope, a crumpled email printout. An exchange between Garrett and a doctor whose name I recognized, a psychiatrist with a reputation for being available to the highest bidder. The email read, "The evaluation is scheduled for the 25th. Once you sign the competency declaration stating that Walter is suffering from advanced dementia, we can expedite the power of attorney to full guardianship. We have found a facility in the state that accepts state-funded patients. It is budget-friendly, which will help with our cash flow issues." I stared at that page. Budget-friendly? State-funded. They were not just going to steal my money. They were going to warehouse me among the forgotten, lock me away in some hellhole where I would rot medicated vacant while they sipped margaritas on a Caribbean beach paid for with the years I had spent building everything they now claimed as their own. Hot tears pushed at my eyes. Angry tears. I had changed Garrett's diapers. I had taught him to ride a bike. I had paid for his mistakes, pulled him out of trouble, handed him a seat at the table. And this was what he offered in return. A cut-rate nursing home and an early grave. I wiped my eyes. No time for grief. Grief belonged to men who were safe. I was standing in a war zone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the cheap smartphone I had bought with cash at the convenience store the day before, the one I had tucked away in my sock drawer. I switched on the camera. My hands were rock steady now. The anger had set into something crystalline and cold, hard as diamond. Click. The mortgage draft. Click. The Panama letter. Click. The nursing home email. I photographed every single page, making sure the dates and signatures came through clean. Every piece of their betrayal captured in high definition. I was about to return the papers when something in the trash can beside the desk caught my eye. A glossy brochure crumpled up. I smoothed it flat. A luxury yacht. The price circled in red marker, $12 million. And beside it, in Garrett's handwriting, Freedom ETA 30 days. 30 days. That was their clock. That was how long I had before they triggered the bankruptcy and shipped me off to the asylum. I arranged the papers back into the envelope with care and returned it to the drawer exactly as I had found it. I pushed the drawer shut. The broken lock would show if anyone looked closely, but I was betting on Garrett's arrogance. He was too lazy, too certain of my defeat to bother checking. He could never imagine the freeloader running a forensic investigation in his own office. I pushed back the chair and stood. I took one last look around the room. It no longer felt like my office. It felt like a crime scene. And in a way, that is exactly what it was. They had already killed the father and husband I had once been. I walked out and pulled the doors shut behind me, using the screwdriver to press the latch back into a rough semblance of locked. Not perfect, but it would hold. Back in the kitchen, I poured a glass of water. My throat was parched. Through the window, I looked out over the lawn, and there was the swing set I had built for Garrett when he was 5 now, rusted over, tangled in vines. They wanted to declare me incompetent. They wanted to put me away. I took a sip and checked the time. Diane would be back in 20 minutes. I needed to be in the living room with a newspaper in my hands, the picture of the docile, muddled old man they had decided I was. I settled into my armchair and opened the paper, though I read nothing. My mind was already 3 moves ahead. They had a 30-day plan. Well, so did I. And mine did not end in a nursing home. Mine ended with them in a cell. I could feel the burner phone in my pocket, heavy as a loaded weapon. I had the evidence. Now I needed the man to use it. I needed Harwick. I needed to get these photographs to him before the day was out. The groan of the garage door rolled up through the floorboards. Diane was home. I tilted my head and shut my eyes, playing at sleep. But behind those eyelids, I was completely, piercingly awake. The lion was not sleeping. The lion was waiting for the right moment to move. And when I moved, they would never see it coming. The game had shifted. They were playing for money. I was playing for justice. And justice, I had decided, would be served cold. I waited until the house sank into the thick quiet of mid-afternoon. Diane upstairs, the household staff on their break. I slipped out through the side door near the pantry, the one that squeals unless you lift the handle just so. I knew every idiosyncrasy of this house because I had paid for every beam and every brick in it. I went down the long driveway past the trimmed hedges Garrett complained cost too much to keep up, and out onto the main road. I did not take my Jaguar. I did not call a cab. I walked to the bus stop again. The ride into the city was long, but it gave me the space to gather myself. I sat in the back watching the skyline draw closer. Garrett and Diane believed my world ended at the estate gates. They thought my power was confined to the accounts they had frozen. They were about to learn a sharp and painful lesson in the difference between being rich and being wealthy. Rich is carrying a platinum card. Wealth is owning the bank that prints it. I stepped off the bus in the financial district, but I did not walk toward the gleaming glass tower where Pruitt Construction kept its offices. That building with its chrome lobby and indifferent receptionists was nothing but a facade. The public face of my business. The part I had always let the world see. What comes next is the moment I had been moving toward for a long time. And when the full picture finally came into view, it was heavier than I had prepared myself for. Before we get there, if you ever suspected someone close to you was working against you in secret, would you confront them immediately, or would you wait and gather every last piece of proof first? The part I let Garrett play with. I walked 2 blocks east to a building most people would pass without a second glance. Pre-war construction, limestone and granite, narrow windows, a heavy iron door. No sign out front. No logo. Just a small brass number plate buffed to a shine. Number 440. I pushed through the heavy door into the lobby. Cool air and the scent of old money-leather beeswax and quiet. No piped-in music. No teenagers slouched behind the desk snapping gum. A large man in a dark suit stood beside the elevator. The moment he saw me, he drew himself up straight. He did not ask for ID. He did not ask whether I had an appointment. He simply nodded, a gesture of deep, unaffected respect. "Good afternoon, Mr. Pruitt," he said, voice low. "It is good to see you, sir." "Good afternoon, Orrin," I replied. "Is Harwick upstairs?" "He is waiting for you in the boardroom, sir. The private elevator is ready." Orrin pressed the button for me. As the door slid shut and sealed out the world, I felt my shoulders drop for the first time in 2 days. In my own home, I was a freeloader. In my son's office, I was a nuisance. But here at the heart of the real operation, I was the king. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse that occupied the entire top floor. This was the headquarters of WP Holdings, my true company, the entity no one in my family knew existed. Harwick was at the window, eyes on the city. He turned when I came in. A man of my own generation, sharp as a blade, wearing a suit that cost more than Garrett's Maserati. He did not look at me with pity. He looked at me with the focused intensity of a general awaiting his orders. "Walter," he said, crossing the room to grip my hand firmly. "I got your message. You look like hell." "They cut off my cards." "Harwick," I said, moving toward the large oak conference table. "They put me on a $500 allowance, and they are planning to have me placed in a state-run nursing home within 30 days. Harwick's expression darkened. He said nothing. He walked to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of scotch, then slid one across the table to me. "Drink," he said. "You are going to need it." I took a sip. It burned in a way that sharpened everything. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the burner phone, and set it on the table between us. "The evidence is on there," I said. Photos of the mortgage draft, the offshore accounts in Panama, the emails with that crooked psychiatrist. They are gutting Pruitt Construction, selling the equipment, and routing the money into Garrett's shell company. Harwick picked up the phone and scrolled through the images. His eyebrows rose. "They are sloppy," he muttered. "Greedy and sloppy. They did not even bother with encrypted email. This is a smash-and-grab operation, not a real scheme." He set the phone down and looked at me steadily. "So they think they are stealing the company," he said. They think they are stealing everything, I corrected him. The house, the cars, the business. They believe they have already won. Harwick smiled at that. A shark's smile. He walked to a large covered easel in the corner and pulled off the sheet. Beneath it was an intricate organizational chart. It is time to remind you what you actually own, Walter, because I think in your generosity, you may have lost sight of just how thoroughly we insulated you. He pointed to a small box near the very bottom of the chart labeled Pruitt Construction, LLC. This is what Garrett is fighting over, Harwick said. The company that builds the bridges and lays the roads. Assets of roughly $30 million. A solid little operation. He paused, then moved his pointer to the massive box at the top of the chart, the one with lines branching out in every direction. And this, Harwick said, his voice dropping a notch, is WP Holdings. I studied the chart. I knew it, of course, I had designed it myself. But seeing it laid out this way brought everything into sharp relief. WP Holdings is the parent company. Harwick continued. It holds 100% of the shares of Pruitt Construction, but it also owns the land the Pruitt Construction offices sit on. It owns the leasing company that holds title to every crane and bulldozer Garrett is trying to sell. He tapped the chart again. And the estate, Walter. Who holds the deed to the estate? WP Holdings, I said quietly. Correct. You transferred the deed 10 years ago for liability protection. You and Diane are technically tenants. Zero rent, but you do not own the bricks. WP Holdings does. And the cars? I asked, though I already knew. Company vehicles, Harwick said. Leased to Pruitt Construction by WP Holdings. He settled into the chair across from me, leaning forward. Do you understand what this means? Walter, Garrett and Diane are trying to sell assets that are not theirs to sell. They are trying to mortgage a house they are merely renting. They are trying to move trucks that belong to a leasing corporation. They are not masterminds. They are children trying to sell the school furniture because they have convinced themselves it belongs to them just because they sit at the desks. I looked at the chart. My empire. $500 million in real estate, intellectual property, and diversified investments. Pruitt Construction. The company Garrett was willing to destroy me for was barely a rounding error. Maybe 5% of my total net worth. They do not know, I said. Not how could they? Harwick replied. You never told them. You wanted them to develop their own character. You wanted Garrett to work in the construction company and learn what a dollar actually costs. You never told him it was just the training wheels. A heavy sadness settled over me. I had tested them. I had handed them a small measure of power to see what they would make of it. Instead of rising, they had become something I did not recognize. I had imagined one day bringing Garrett here to this office and laying out the full picture of what awaited him. I had wanted to watch his eyes go wide. I had wanted to say, "Son, all of this is yours." That day would never come now. So, Harwick said, cutting through the silence, what we have is a situation where the subsidiary management, your wife and son, are committing massive corporate fraud and theft against the parent company. Yes, I said. And since you are the sole shareholder of WP Holdings, they are stealing directly from you. But they are doing it in a manner that exposes them to federal charges. Wire fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy. Harwick opened a folder on the table. I have taken the liberty of preparing 2 paths, Walter, he said. Path A is the measured approach. We reveal the corporate structure. We show them they own nothing. We remove them, cut them off, and let them find their own way. No prison, just the end of the life they have been living. He looked at me carefully. And Path B? Path B is the nuclear option, Harwick said. We stand back and let them proceed. We let them try to move the equipment. We let them attempt to execute the mortgage papers. We let them commit the crime in full. And then once the ink has dried, we bring everything down on them. Forensic auditors, the FBI, grand larceny and corporate espionage charges. We take back every penny and see them in a cell. I stared into the amber of my glass. I thought about the dinner the night before. Loretta calling me a freeloader. Diane telling me to beg for my breakfast money. The nursing home brochure, the price circled in that red marker. They had no intention of showing me any mercy. They were going to shut me away until I was gone, willing to erase my life for a payout. I looked up at Harwick. How long before they try to finalize the equipment sale? I asked. Based on the emails you found, the buyers from the Cayman Islands are expecting the contracts in 3 days, Harwick said. 3 days, I repeated. I stood and walked to the window. Down below, somewhere in that city, Garrett was probably holding court with his friends, boasting about how he had finally seized control. Harwick, I said, my voice level. Yes, Walter. Prepare path B, I said. But I want to add something. I want to be the one to catch them myself. I want to be looking them in the eye when the handcuffs go on. Harwick nodded slowly and reached for his pen. We will need a forensic audit of the Pruitt construction servers, he said. We need to trace every dollar they have moved over the last 6 months. Can you get us access? I smiled. The first genuine smile I had managed in days. I hired the IT director of Pruitt Construction 15 years ago, I said. He thinks I am a Luddite who cannot work a mouse, but I covered his daughter's leukemia treatment out of my own pocket. His loyalty belongs to me, not to Garrett. Then we have everything we need, Harwick said. I finished my scotch. I felt strong. I felt ready. I am going back to the house, I said. I have to keep playing the confused old man for a few more days. I have to let them believe they are winning. Be careful, Walter, Harwick warned. Cornered rats bite. I slipped the burner phone back into my pocket. They are not rats, Harwick, I said, turning toward the elevator. They are parasites, and I have just found the cure. I rode the elevator down. I stepped back out onto the street. The sun was bright, but for my family, the long winter had already begun. They wanted the money. They wanted the power. Well, they were about to feel the full weight of it come crashing down on them. I sat in the leather chair of my real office at WP Holdings, the one my family had no idea existed. The city spread out beyond the windows, a monument to what focus and discipline can build. But my mind was not on the view. It was on the betrayal playing out under my own roof. Harwick, my attorney and oldest friend, sat across from me, his face grave. He had just finished walking me through the legal architecture of what we were about to set in motion. Ruthless. Necessary. You know, Harwick, I said, my voice handing them the reins of Pruitt Construction that was never about retiring. It was a test. Harwick nodded slowly. A loyalty test. Yes, I said. I wanted to see if they could hold a little power without losing themselves. I wanted to see if Garrett had the integrity to run a business that supports 200 families. I wanted to see if Diane could be a genuine partner, not just a spender. I drew a slow breath. The air in the room felt weighted. They failed, Harwick. They failed so completely it is almost impressive. I handed them a company worth $30 million, a golden goose, and their first instinct was not to nurture it. It was to wring its neck and sell the feathers. Harwick leaned forward, hands folded on the oak table. It is worse than failure, Walter. It is criminal negligence. And with this offshore scheme layered on top, it crosses into active fraud. If we do not move, they will not simply bankrupt the company, they will drag your name down with it. I know, I said. which is why we are finished playing games. I reached for the phone on the desk. Secure line. I dialed a number I had not touched in years. 2 rings, then a clipped professional voice. Caldwell Security. This is Walter Pruitt, I said. Authentication code Delta Forma 12R. A brief pause, then a noticeable shift in tone. Mr. Pruitt, how can we assist you, sir? I need the ghost team, I said. Tonight, Pruitt Construction servers full forensic audit. Every email, every transaction, every deleted file from the past 6 months. And I want it done without setting off any internal alarms. Understood, sir. We will have a team inside the system within the hour. Do we have authorization to bypass the CFO's firewalls? And do you have authorization to burn the firewalls down if that is what it takes? I said. Just bring me the evidence. I want to know where every single cent has gone. I want to know who signed the checks, who authorized the equipment transfers. Consider it done. I hung up. Harwick watched me with a look that was equal parts admiration and concern. You are unleashing the hounds, he said. They are not hounds, Harwick, I said, rising and moving to the window. They are surgeons. They are going to cut out the infection that has spread through my company. Garrett thinks he is clever because he hired some kid to shred documents. He has no idea that digital footprints do not vanish. He thinks he can bury money in the Cayman Islands without a trace. He does not know that I have people who could find a dime dropped in a desert. I turned back to face him. This is the part that hurts, Harwick. Garrett is my son. I changed his diapers. I taught him to throw a baseball. I paid for his mistakes when he was a teenager. I always believed he would grow out of it, that eventually he would become a man. Harwick refilled my glass. Some men never grow up, Walter. They just get older and more expensive. I took the glass but held it without drinking. I stared into the amber. I remember when he was 10, I said quietly. He stole a candy bar from the corner store. I made him walk back and return it and apologize to the owner face to face. He cried. He said he was sorry. I thought he had learned what it meant to take something that was not his. I turned the glass slowly in my hand. Now he is trying to take a $30 million company, and he is not sorry. He is simply greedy. And Diane, she is no victim in this. She is the architect. She is the one driving him. She is the one who wants the lifestyle without ever doing the work. I set the glass down with a sharp click. Enough looking backward. We have work to do. Harwick opened his laptop. The audit team will need roughly 24 hours to assemble a complete case, he said. They will map the flow of funds, identify the shell companies, match the transfer timestamps to Garrett's login activity. By tomorrow night, we will have a dossier that could put them away for 20 years. Good, I said. But financial records alone are not enough. I need proof of the conspiracy. I need to tie them to the doctor. I need to establish that they were actively planning to have me declared incompetent. The team will pull their personal emails as well, Harwick said. If they used company devices or the company's Wi-Fi, we will find every word. I nodded. A cold resolve had settled over me. The grief was receding, replaced by the clear-eyed steadiness of a man who sees the job ahead and knows exactly how to do it. What about the banks? I asked. The letters are already drafted, Harwick said. The moment you give the word, we freeze Pruitt Construction's assets. We alert the lenders that the mortgage applications are fraudulent. We notify the Cayman authorities that the incoming funds are proceeds of crime. Not yet, I said. Hold until the audit is complete. I want them to feel secure for a few more days. I want them to sign the final paperwork. I want them to commit the crime in full. Harwick raised an eyebrow. That is a risk, Walter. If they move the money quickly, they will not, I cut in. They are far too arrogant. They believe I am a confused old man fretting about his breakfast money. They think you are nowhere in this picture. They think they have all the time in the world. I walked to the organizational chart Harwick had shown me earlier and ran my finger along the line from WP Holdings down to Pruitt Construction. I built this, I said. Sweat and blood, every bit of it. I will not watch them pick it apart for a quick payday. I looked at him. When this is finished, Harwick, I am going to make changes. Significant ones. What kind of changes? He asked. I am going to find people who actually give a damn, I said. People like Clyde. I am going to bring him back. And I am going to seek out young people, hungry people who want to build something that lasts. Not just people waiting to inherit it. Harwick smiled. That sounds like a plan, Walter. I glanced at my watch. I needed to get back to the house. Back to performing the role of the addled, beaten old man. Back to sitting at that dinner table listening to their lies, watching them spend my money and insult my intelligence. It would be the most demanding performance of my life. I grabbed my coat. Harwick, I said from the doorway. Make sure the audit team looks at jewelry purchases. Jewelry, he asked. Yes, I said. Diane has been wearing a new diamond bracelet, and I noticed Lacey Crofton, my daughter-in-law, sporting a new watch. I do not believe either of those came out of their own savings. I will add it to the list, Harwick said. I walked out and into the private elevator. As the doors drew shut, a strange calm came over me. The machine was in motion. The gears were turning. The trap was set. They wanted to treat me like a child. They wanted to push me into a corner. Well, they were about to discover that nobody puts Walter Pruitt in a corner. I stepped out into the lobby and nodded to Orrin, the security guard. Have a good evening, Mr. Pruitt, he said. I will, Orrin, I said. I really will. I walked out into the cool evening air. The city lights were flickering on one by one. It was beautiful. I caught the bus back out to the suburbs and settled into the rear seat again. I looked at the people around me. Ordinary people. Honest people. People who had earned every dollar in their pockets. I felt a closer kinship with them than I did with my own family. By the time I stepped off the bus, I had a mile left to walk to the estate. My legs were heavy, but my spirit was climbing. I came up the driveway to find the house blazing with light. Shadows crossed and recrossed in the dining room windows. Another bottle of my wine opened, no doubt. Another toast to their clever little scheme. I let myself in through the side door and caught the sound of their laughter drifting out of the dining room, high-pitched and hollow. I went to the kitchen. The chef, a decent man named Benito, was putting the finishing touches on dessert. He looked at me with quiet, sorrowful eyes. Mr. Pruitt, he said softly, would you like some dinner? I set a plate of the roast beef aside for you before they cleaned it out. Oi, thank you, Benito, I said, resting a hand briefly on his shoulder. You are a good man. I took the plate and went up the back staircase to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed and ate the cold roast beef. It was delicious. My phone buzzed. A text from Harwick. Team is in. Extracting data now. It's worse than we thought. I smiled. Let it be worse, I thought. The worse it is, the harder they will fall. I finished my dinner and stretched back against the pillows. I closed my eyes. Down below, Garrett's voice rose up through the floorboards, loud and full of itself. To the future, he called out. I whispered into the dark. Yes, son, to the future. My future. Without you. The scratch of my fountain pen across heavy bond paper was the only sound in the room, slow and deliberate, like the drawing of a blade across a whetstone. I was seated in the bank's private conference room, a place of marble floors and ceilings, tall enough to make a lesser man feel small. I did not feel small today. I felt enormous. Across the table sat Mr. Caldwell, the senior vice president of commercial lending. A man who had known me for 30 years. A man who understood exactly where the bodies were buried because he had helped finance the shovels. He watched me sign the final document with the measured composure of a professional, but I could see the curiosity stirring behind his eyes. "There," I said, capping the pen with a satisfying click. "That reinforces the title deeds." Mr. Caldwell drew the stack of papers toward him, adjusted his glasses, and scanned the signatures. "So just to be absolutely clear for the record, Walter, you are reaffirming that the residential property located at 4400 Briargrove Lane and the commercial building at 101 Greens Road are sole assets of WP Holdings." "Correct," I said, settling back in the leather chair. Caldwell continued, his voice dropping a notch. "And you are confirming that the occupants of said residential property, namely Diane Pruitt, Garrett Pruitt, and their extended family, hold no legal claim to the title and are in effect tenants at will." "They are guests," I corrected him, my voice flat and cold. "Guests who have long overstayed their welcome. Guests who have violated the terms of their stay by attempting to sell the furniture." Caldwell nodded slowly. He stamped the document. The red ink of the seal spread across the white page like a bloodstain. "That makes the next document legally binding, then." He slid a single sheet across the mahogany table. "The eviction notice, standard form, brutal in its plainness. Notice to vacate." It gave the occupants exactly 60 minutes to remove their personal belongings before the locks were changed and law enforcement was called. 60 minutes to pack a lifetime of lies. I stared at the page. I thought about that house, every detail of it. I had drawn up the design myself. I had chosen the marble for the foyer with my own hands. I had picked the spot for the garden where Garrett used to play as a boy. Putting my name to this felt like setting fire to a church, but they had already desecrated everything inside it. They had turned my home into a den of thieves. I lifted the pen. My hand hung over the signature line. For a single fleeting moment I hesitated. A boy's face appeared in my mind, Garrett at 7 or 8, looking up at me with those wide, trusting eyes. Then that image dissolved, replaced by the face of the man who had sat in his own office and laughed while he plotted to have me locked away in a state asylum. The hesitation was gone. I signed. The lines were firm and sharp. "The eviction is drafted," Caldwell said, sliding the page into a folder marked confidential. "Now the credit lines." This was the part I had been waiting for. This was where I pulled the knot tight. "I want a total freeze," I said. Caldwell opened his laptop and worked through a sequence of security codes. "Let's review the exposure. Diane has a black card linked to the main WP Holdings operational account. Garrett has a platinum business card and 3 subsidiary cards for his wife and personal use. They also have access to the corporate expense account for travel and dining. Limitless," I muttered. "They spend as if the money simply materializes." As of this morning, their combined spending for the month exceeds $80,000, Caldwell said, eyes on the screen. "Mostly designer clothing, jewelry, and a deposit on a rental villa in Tuscany." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. A victory lap before they had crossed the finish line. "I want you to set a kill switch," I said. "Every card, every line of credit, every access code terminated simultaneously. Not a standard decline for insufficient funds. I want the system to flag the cards as stolen. I want merchants instructed to confiscate the physical cards on the spot if they try to use them." Caldwell typed for a moment, then looked up. "We can schedule that. When do you want the blackout to hit?" I looked at my watch. I ran the timeline in my head. Harwick's team would wrap the forensic audit by tomorrow morning. The equipment buyers were expecting signed contracts tomorrow afternoon. Garrett and Diane would be feeling untouchable by then. Celebrating. Tomorrow at noon, I said. 12 o'clock sharp. That is 0 hour. Caldwell nodded. 0 hour. At 12:00 p.m. tomorrow, they will be financially insolvent. They will not be able to buy a stick of gum. And the mortgage applications tali. Flagged. Caldwell confirmed. The moment they attempt to close on the reverse mortgage or the equipment sale, the system triggers a fraud alert. The banks will not simply turn down the loan, they will freeze the application and notify the authorities. He looked at me steadily. You have effectively encircled them, Walter. It is a siege, I said. And they have no idea the walls have already been breached. I stood. A strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration moved through me. It is a terrible thing to hunt your own family, but it becomes necessary when they have chosen to become predators. Thank you, Caldwell, I said, extending my hand. He shook it firmly. Good luck, Walter. I hope you find what you are looking for. I walked out of the bank into the sharp afternoon light and hailed a cab. I could not risk the bus today. I needed to be back at the house and in position. The ride was a blur. My mind was rehearsing the next 24 hours frame by frame. I pictured the look on Diane's face when the waiter at her favorite lunch spot returned to the table with her card cut in half. I pictured Garrett reaching for a pen to sign the sale papers, only to find the lawyers staring back at him with something colder than suspicion. I arrived at the estate. The gates swung open automatically for the cab. I looked at the house as we rolled up the drive. Majestic, still proud against the blue sky. But I knew it was a house of cards. And I had just drawn out the bottom one. I paid the driver in cash, walked to the front door, and let myself in. The house was alive with activity. Rimowa suitcases were stacked high in the hallway. I moved into the living room. Diane was there directing the maid on the proper way to wrap a box of crystal. Garrett was on his phone, pacing animated, radiating the energy of a man who believed he had already won. And Dad! Garrett called out when he spotted me. He actually smiled, a real one or a convincing imitation. You are back early. And I just went for a walk, I said, letting my voice come out thin and worn. Sat in the park for a while. Well, good for you, Diane said, not lifting her eyes from the crystal. Stay out of the way, Walter. We are busy. We are going on a little trip. A trip? I asked, shuffling into the room and settling on the edge of the sofa. Yes, Garrett said, ending his call. We are going to Italy for a few weeks to celebrate closing a big deal. He shot Diane a wink. She smirked back. That sounds expensive, I said, pressing my hands together to hide the fact that they had curled into fists. Do not worry about the cost, Garrett said, strolling over and patting me on the shoulder. It was the kind of pat you give a dog you barely tolerate. We have got it all sorted. The business is finally turning the corner. We are going to be very, very rich. I looked up at him. I looked into the eyes of my son. His face was lit up with greed. He had no idea that in less than 24 hours he would have nothing. He had no idea that the credit card sitting in his pocket was a ticking time bomb. I am happy for you, Garrett, I said. I truly am, and I meant it. I was happy. Happy that his true nature was so completely exposed. It made what I was about to do that much easier to carry out. Make sure you pack everything you need, I said quietly. You never know when you might be coming back. They did not hear me. They returned to their packing, trading thoughts on first-class seats and five-star hotels. discussing how to spend the money they were lifting from me. I rose from the sofa and moved toward the stairs. Where are you headed? Diane asked. To my room, I said. I am worn out. Think I will lie down for a while. Go ahead, she said. Just make sure you are up for dinner. We are ordering lobster, a last little treat before we leave. Lobster, paid for with my money. I climbed the stairs. Each step felt weighted. But it was a good kind of weight. The weight of the judge's gavel hanging in the air before the sentence is read. I went into my room and shut the door behind me. I crossed to the window and looked out over the grounds. 0 hour. Tomorrow at noon. I checked my watch. 18 hours to go. I would let them eat their lobster. I would let them drink my wine. I would let them sleep in my silk sheets one final time. Because when they woke up tomorrow, the world would look nothing like they expected. I sat on the edge of the bed and drew out the eviction notice from my inside pocket. I smoothed it flat. Notice to vacate. I set it on the nightstand beside the framed family photograph taken 10 years ago. Every face in that picture was smiling. We looked like a happy family. I turned the photo face down. That family was gone. The people downstairs were strangers to me now. And tomorrow I was going to introduce them to the landlord. The morning sun pushed through the blinds of my private office, throwing long, sharp lines across the mahogany desk. I had not slept. I had spent the night flat on my back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the stillness, waiting for the dawn that would bring the end of everything I had once called family. At 8:00 sharp, the heavy oak door swung open and Harwick walked in. No knock, no smile. He had a thick black binder tucked under his arm, carrying it the way a priest carries a Bible at a funeral. He set it down on the desk in front of me. The sound it made hitting the wood rang out across the large room. It was a heavy sound, the sound of judgment. It is done, Harwick said, his voice stripped of any feeling. The forensic team worked through the night. We have everything. I stared at the black cover. I did not want to open it. As long as it stayed closed, some small, foolish corner of me could still hope it was all one big mistake. That my son was simply reckless, not a criminal. That my wife was simply selfish, not a thief. But I knew better. I reached out and lifted the cover. The first page was a summary. The figures were printed in bold red ink. Total misappropriated funds for $200,000. It landed like a blow to the chest. $4,000 in 6 months. I turned the page. There was a full breakdown of the transactions. Garrett had been busy. He had created a fictitious vendor called RC Logistics. Every week, Pruitt Construction wired RC Logistics $50,000 in consulting fees. Consulting fees for a company that did not exist. He was not even trying to hide it, Harwick said, tapping a line on the spreadsheet. He used his home address for the shell company. He figured you would never look. He thought he was smarter than the system. I dragged my finger along the line. Garrett Pruitt. My son. The boy who used to hit me up for $5 to go to the movies was now stealing $50,000 a week from his own father. But it gets worse, Harwick said. Turn to Section 3. I flipped through the pages. Section 3 was labeled Lacey Crofton, my daughter-in-law. The woman who smiled at me across the Thanksgiving table and told me how much she respected my work ethic. The page was covered in credit card statements. Corporate Amex, Kylie and Company, $40,000. Cartier, $65,000. Van Cleef and Arpels, $120,000. She logged them as office supplies, Harwick said, his voice thick with contempt. She bought a diamond necklace and entered it in the ledger as printer toner. She bought a Rolex and classified it as employee training. A cold, hard rage settled into my gut. It was not about the money. I had plenty of money. It was the insult. They believed I was so dim, so oblivious that I could not tell a diamond necklace from a box of toner. They were laughing at me with every swipe of that card. "And here is the smoking gun," Harwick said, turning to the back of the binder. It was a copy of a wire transfer request dated for today. $12,200. This is the sale of the heavy equipment, Harwick explained. They are selling the cranes, the bulldozers, the excavators. They are stripping the company to the bone. The funds are set to be wired to a bank in the Cayman Islands at 2:00 this afternoon. I glanced at the time. It was 9:00 in the morning. "They are cutting it close," I said. "They are desperate," Harwick replied. "They know the company is hemorrhaging cash because of what they have stolen. They need this sale to cover their tracks and bankroll their escape to Italy. If this wire clears, the company is finished. 200 people lose their jobs." "It will not go through," I said, closing the binder. "No," Harwick said, "it will not. Because we are going to stop them." He reached into his briefcase and produced a slimmer folder. Inside were 3 arrest warrants. "I had to call in a favor with the district attorney," Harwick said. "Based on the evidence in this binder, he signed these an hour ago. Grand larceny wire fraud conspiracy to commit embezzlement." I looked at the names on the warrants. Garrett Pruitt, Diane Pruitt, Lacey Crofton, my family, my wife, my son, my daughter-in-law. I picked up these warrants. The paper was thin, but the weight of it was crushing. I was about to send my entire family to prison. I was about to become a man with no one left. "Are you sure about this?" Walter Harwick asked, his voice going soft. "Once we execute these, there is no going back. You can still stop it now. You can simply fire them. You can just throw them out. You do not have to send them to prison." I stood and walked to the window. I looked down at the city one last time. I thought about the dinner table. I thought about Loretta calling me a freeloader. I thought about Diane telling me to beg for breakfast money. I thought about the nursing home brochure in Garrett's trash can. They had shown me no mercy whatsoever. "Harwick," I said, my voice as hard as steel. They were going to lock me away. They were going to erase me. If I walk away from this now, they will just find another victim. They will do this to someone else. Garrett will teach his children to do the same. I turned back to face him. No, the cycle ends here. I walked back to the desk and lifted the black binder. I held it firmly. This was my weapon. This was my shield. "What is the plan?" Harwick asked. I checked my watch. It is 9:30. They are at the house packing for Italy. They believe they are flying out tonight. They think the money hits their account this afternoon. I slipped the warrants into my inside pocket. "I am going home," I said. "I'm going to ask them for breakfast money one last time. I want to give them one final opportunity to show a shred of humanity. One last chance to confess. And if they do not?" Harwick asked. "Then we execute the warrants," I said. "Have the police standing by. Tell them to wait down the street. When I give the signal, I want them to breach the front door." "And the signal?" Harwick asked. "I will text you," I said. "One word." "Justice." Harwick nodded. He studied me with an odd expression. Sadness, maybe. Or something closer to respect. "You are a strong man, Walter," he said. "Stronger than I could ever be." "I am not strong, Harwick," I said, moving toward the door. "I am just a builder. And when a building is rotten all the way through, you do not slap a coat of paint on it. You tear it down." I walked out of the office. The binder sat heavy under my arm. The elevator ride down felt like a descent into the underworld. I stepped out onto the street and flagged down a cab. To the suburbs, I told the driver, and do not take the slow route. As the city receded behind me, I opened the binder again. I studied the photograph of the diamond necklace Lacey had purchased. It was stunning. It would look very fine in an evidence locker. I looked at the transfer order for the $12 million. Freedom Garrett had scrawled on the document. He was right about that. He was buying freedom. Just not for himself. He was buying it for me. Freedom from his deceptions. Freedom from his greed. Freedom from the exhausting effort of trying to rescue a son who had no interest in being rescued. The cab rolled up to the estate gates. They were standing open. A moving truck sat in the driveway. They were not simply packing clothes. They were hauling out furniture, artwork, stripping the place clean before they vanished into the night. I paid the driver and climbed out. The sun was bright overhead. Birds were carrying on as if nothing in the world was wrong. It was a beautiful day for a funeral. I started up the driveway. My heart hammered in my chest. Boom! 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 I reached the front door. It was wide open. Music drifted out from inside, bright, celebratory, completely at odds with what was coming. They were in a mood to celebrate. I gripped the binder tighter. I crossed the threshold. The lion was home, and the hunt was finished. I walked into the living room. The air was heavy with expensive perfume and the sharp smell of new leather luggage. The room looked like a departure lounge for people who had never worked an honest day. Rimowa suitcases were stacked by the door, primed for their first-class flight to Rome. My wife Diane was holding a flute of champagne, face flushed with the pleasure of spending money she had never earned. Garrett was showing Lacey photographs of the villa they had rented in Tuscany, a sprawling estate that cost more for a single week than most decent men made in a year. Loretta was settled into my favorite armchair, like a queen on a throne, scolding the maid for not folding her silk scarves to her satisfaction. They were so happy, so utterly sure of themselves. They noticed me as I entered, and their smiles did not disappear. They just changed. The joy curdled into something that looked more like contempt. I was the blemish on their perfect tableau, the old dog to be shooed outside so the real party could carry on. I stopped in the center of the room. I let my shoulders cave forward. I let a slight tremor work into my hands. I let my eyes go glassy and unfocused. I had to sell this performance, had to convince them I was completely broken. Diane, I said, my voice cracking just enough to sound pitiful. I need a word with you. Diane exhaled, shooting a long-suffering look at Lacey. She took a measured sip of champagne before turning to face me. What is it now, Walter? Can you not see we are in the middle of something? The car arrives in an hour. It is about breakfast, I said, studying my shoes. I went out to pick up some eggs, but I think I misplaced the card. The one you gave me. I cannot find it anywhere. Garrett let out a laugh, sharp, barking. You lost it, Dad. That was 500 sols. Do you have any idea how irresponsible that is? I am sorry, I mumbled. I am hungry, Diane. I have not eaten since yesterday. Could you spare me $20, just enough to go to the diner and get some pancakes? The room went quiet. This was the moment. Total submission laid out for all of them to enjoy. I was asking for $20 in a house worth millions. Diane set her glass down. She crossed the room toward me, her heels sharp against the hardwood. She stopped right in front of my face. She smelled of expensive wine and pure arrogance. $20, she repeated, her voice low. Yes, please, I said. Just $20. A smile spread across her face, cruel, twisted. No. I looked up at her, letting my expression go slack with disbelief. No, calm, Walter, I told you, she said, pitching her voice up so the whole room could hear. I told you that you were going to have to learn. You think money simply appears. You think you can lose your allowance and come crawling back to me. Let this be a lesson to you. If you lost the card, you go without. Maybe a little hunger will sharpen your memory. But Diane, I pleaded, reaching out a trembling hand toward her arm. She recoiled as if I were something unclean. I am your husband. You are a burden, she snapped. A child wearing an old man's face. And I am completely done carrying you, Loretta chimed in from the armchair, her voice like stones dragged across gravel. That is exactly right, Diane. Hold the line. You give him money, now he never learns a thing. Keep a man poor, and he stays manageable. That is how you train a dog, and that is how you handle a husband. Garrett wandered over, shaking his head with theatrical disappointment. Dad, honestly, this is just embarrassing. You are making a fool of yourself. Go to your room. We will leave some crackers out before we head to the airport. Crackers. I looked at each of them in turn. Garrett, my son. Lacey, who had a stolen diamond necklace sitting at her throat right now, purchased on my company's account. Diane, the woman I had spent 40 years loving. Loretta, the parasite I had fed for decades. They were savoring this, feasting on my humiliation. It made them feel large. It gave them justification for what they were doing. In their minds, I was weak, and the weak deserved to be crushed. I turned my gaze to the grandfather clock I had bought in France 30 years ago. Tick, tock. The big hand swept forward. It locked into place at the top of the hour. 12 zeros, 0 hour. I drew a slow, deep breath, held it for a beat, then let it go. And then the future announced itself. It started with Diane's phone, one sharp, insistent ping, then another, then a rapid cascade of vibrations rattling across the table. Then Garrett's phone buzzed hard in his pocket. Then Lacey's watch face lit up. Diane frowned, snatching up her phone. Who on earth is sending all of this? She muttered. She unlocked the screen. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth fell open and no sound followed. What is it? Garrett asked, pulling out his own phone. The color drained from his face. He stared at the screen, swiped, tapped furiously. My card, Garrett stammered. I just got an alert. My business card was declined for the villa deposit. They said the payment was reversed. That is impossible, Diane snapped. I checked the balance myself this morning. She tapped her screen again. It says account frozen, she whispered. Suspected fraud. Contact issuer immediately. Lacey shrieked. My cards too. I just tried to book the Uber Black, and it says payment method invalid. What is happening is the entire banking system down. Garrett looked up, panic beginning to crack through the surface. It must be a system glitch, some kind of widespread failure. I will call the bank. He dialed, put it on speaker. The automated voice filled the room, loud, cheerful, indifferent. We are sorry, but the account ending in 4590 has been flagged for criminal activity and is currently under federal investigation. If you are the account holder, please remain on the line for law enforcement. Garrett let the phone slip from his hand. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. Criminal activity, Loretta wheezed from her chair. What did you do, you fool? You triggered a federal audit. I did not do anything, Garrett shouted. We were careful. I stood up, not the way the old man who wanted pancakes would stand, the way the man who built skyscrapers stands. I pulled my spine straight. The tremor evaporated from my hands, as if it had never been there. I buttoned my jacket with slow, deliberate precision. I looked at them, and the mask came off. My eyes were no longer glassy. They were clear and cold and hard as granite. "It was not a glitch, Garrett," I said. My voice was full and steady, and it filled every corner of the room. They all turned. They looked at me the way you look at a stranger who has appeared in your house. Walter, Diane said, her voice beginning to shake. "What are you talking about?" I walked to the table where the champagne bottle sat. I lifted it and looked at the label. "You told me I would have to beg for every penny, Diane," I said, without any heat in my voice at all. "You told me that without money, I am just noise." I upended the bottle over the Turkish rug. The champagne splashed down, foaming and spreading across the weave. "Well, I have some news for you," I went on. "You are the ones who are broke." Garrett stepped forward, trying to reassert himself. "Dad, stop this. Did you call the bank? Did you interfere with the accounts? You have no idea what you are doing. You are going to destroy everything." I turned on him. The force of my stare stopped him cold. "I know precisely what I am doing," I said. "I am the primary account holder. I am the chairman of the board, and I am the man who just pulled the plug on all of it." "What do you mean?" Diane whispered. "I mean that every card in your wallets is worthless plastic," I said. "I mean that the villa in Italy is gone. I mean that the first-class tickets no longer exist." "You cannot do that!" Lacey screamed. "We are authorized users." "You were authorized users on the accounts of WP Holdings," I roared. "My company, my money. And as of $12 today, WP Holdings has terminated all subsidiary privileges on grounds of gross misconduct and theft." "Theft!" Loretta gasped. "How dare you?" I reached into my jacket pocket. Not for a handkerchief, for the black binder Harwick had handed me that morning. It was solid and heavy. I did not offer it to them. I hurled it across the room. It tumbled through the air and slammed into Garrett's chest. He staggered backward, clutching it. "Open it," I said. Garrett's hands were trembling now. Real trembling, nothing like the performance I had put on earlier. He opened the cover. He saw the red figures. He saw the list of shell companies. He saw the emails he had been certain were gone forever. "How?" he breathed. "How did you get any of this?" "You convinced yourself I was senile," I said, moving closer. "You decided I was a helpless old man whose entire world was the garden and his afternoon nap. You forgot who you were dealing with, son. I am the man who taught you how to read, and I am the man who just finished reading everything you wrote." I looked at Diane. She had gone white as chalk, one hand gripping the back of the sofa. "You wanted to put me away, Diane," I said, keeping my voice level. "A state-funded facility. You intended to have me medicated and forgotten while you burned through everything I spent my life building." "Walter." "No, that was just a contingency," she stammered. "Liar." The word came out like a thunderclap. It rang off every wall in the room. And then another sound joined it from outside. Sirens. Heavy, wailing sirens moving up the driveway. Not one car. 3. They went rigid. The last trace of color left their faces. I crossed to the front door and pulled it wide open. Harwick was standing on the step. Behind him stood 4 police officers and 2 men in dark suits carrying FBI badges. Harwick walked in. He took in the luggage. He took in the champagne pooled on the floor. He took in my family clustered together like cornered animals. "Mr. Pruitt," Harwick said. "Is everyone accounted for?" "Yes, Harwick," I said. "The whole crew is present." One of the FBI agents stepped forward. Garrett Pruitt, Diane Pruitt, Lacey Crofton. I have warrants for your arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit embezzlement. Loretta let out a scream. Not fear, fury. You cannot do this. We are the Pruitts. Not anymore, I said. The officers moved in. The room became chaos. Handcuffs snapped shut. Lacey broke into loud, ugly sobbing, pleading with me to tell them it was all a misunderstanding. Diane fought the officer's grip and screamed that she was my wife. Walter! Walter, tell them! Tell them we were only managing the finances. I watched them. I stood there and I watched the police work. I watched them lead my son out, this grown man, weeping the way only a child can weep. I walked over to Garrett. An officer held him by the arm. Garrett looked at me, tears cutting down his face. Dad, please. He choked. Please don't go through with this. I am your son. I held his gaze. My son would never have tried to sell my company out from under me. I said. My son would never have called me a freeloader. You are not my son. You are just a thief who shares my last name. I turned to the officer. Take them. They marched them out through the front door. The wailing faded as the squad car doors slammed shut. Loretta was left alone in the armchair, untouched, but utterly broken. She looked small. She looked every one of her years. I looked at her. You told me that without money, men are just noise, Loretta, I said. She stared back at me, her mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. Well, I said, straightening my coat. I have all the money, and you are going to be very, very quiet. I turned to Harwick. Issue the eviction notice, I said. How? She has 60 minutes to pack. If she is not out by 1 Sauntron, call the sheriff. I walked out onto the porch. The police cars were receding down the drive, carrying away the people who had set out to ruin me. I watched until they disappeared. I breathed in the clean air. I reached into my pocket and felt the debit card with the $500 still in it. It was still there. I turned to Harwick. Harwick, I said. Yes, Walter, I am starving. Let's go get some pancakes. My treat. Harwick smiled. It would be my honor, Walter. We went down the steps together, leaving the empty house at our backs. The war was over. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, the lion was full. The metallic snap of the handcuffs was the loudest thing that house had ever heard. It cut right through the sobbing and the screaming. I watched the officer pull Garrett's arms behind his back. My son, who had spent his entire life wrapped in soft suits and cushioned chairs, flinched hard at the cold touch of steel. He looked at me, his eyes carrying a terror I had never once seen in them before. It was the terror of a man who discovers that the net he has always fallen back on is simply gone. Dad, please. Garrett stammered, his cheek pressed against the Turkish rug where the champagne had splashed. You have to stop this. This is a mistake. I can put the money back. We can fix this together. I looked down at him. There was no anger left anywhere inside me, only a deep, hollow exhaustion. You cannot put the money back, Garrett, I said quietly. You cannot restore trust once you have shredded it to pieces. You cannot give a father back the love you traded in for a villa in Tuscany. The officer hauled him to his feet. Garrett stumbled, his expensive Italian loafers slipping on the wet floor. He looked diminished. He looked like a man I did not know. You have the right to remain silent. The officer recited, his voice flat and practiced. I would use it if I were you, Garrett, I said. You have said more than enough. Across the room, Lacey had come apart entirely. She was wrenching her wrist away from a female officer, screaming about her rights, about harassment. The officer was entirely unmoved. She spun Lacey around and pressed her against the wall. "Ma'am, stop resisting," the officer said firmly. "Wait!" I said, stepping forward. The room fell quiet. Lacey's eyes found mine, and something like hope flared in them. She thought I was riding to her rescue. She thought the old accommodating Walter had returned. I walked up to her. I pointed at her throat. "That necklace," I said. "The diamond pendant. Purchased on the corporate Amex on March 12th. It is evidence." The officer nodded. She reached up and unfastened the clasp. Lacey sucked in a breath as the cold air reached her skin. The officer sealed the jewelry in a plastic evidence bag. It landed with a dull, flat sound. "And the watch," I added. "The Rolex. Company property." Lacey dissolved into uncontrollable sobs as they stripped away the trophies she had bought with stolen money. Without them, she looked exposed. She was just a greedy woman who had reached into the wrong man's pocket. Then there was Diane. My wife was not screaming. She was not fighting anyone. She was standing in the center of the room, both hands pressed over her mouth, watching me. When the FBI agent stepped toward her, she flinched, but she did not run. She simply looked at me. "Walter," she whispered. Her voice was barely holding together. "Walter, 40 years. We have been married for 40 years. You cannot send me to prison. I am your wife." I looked at her. I saw the woman I had built this entire life to share with someone. I saw the woman I had handed my secrets, my fears, and my deepest hopes. And I saw the woman who had sat in this very room the day before and told me to beg her for $20. "You were my wife, Diane," I said, my voice not wavering. "But a wife does not arrange to have her husband committed to a state asylum. A wife does not conspire to have him declared incompetent so she can plunder everything he built. You stopped being my wife the moment you put your name on those papers. Now you are simply a co-conspirator." "Please," she begged, tears tracking down her face through the ruins of her makeup. I was frightened. I did not know what else to do. "No," I said. "You were greedy. You wanted the life without the man who built it. Well, now you have neither." The agent took her arm. She let out a low wail, pure, raw despair. They guided her past me. She reached out, trying to catch my sleeve, but I stepped aside. I let her go. I watched them walk out through the front door, the red and blue lights of the cruisers strobing against the hallway walls. The house went silent except for one person's breathing. Loretta. My mother-in-law had not moved from the armchair. She sat there like a melted wax figure, face drained of all color, eyes fixed blankly on the open doorway where her daughter and grandson had just been taken. Her fingers were clamped around the armrests so hard her knuckles had gone yellow. She was not in handcuffs. She had been clever about that. She had never put her name on a check, never sent a single email. She was the one who had breathed the poison into willing ears, who had encouraged every crime without ever touching the weapon herself. I walked over to her. Harwick followed, drawing a single sheet of paper from his briefcase. Loretta looked up at me. Her lips moved silently at first. Then her voice came back thin and scraping like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "You monster," she hissed. "You have destroyed this family." I gave a short, dry laugh. "I did not destroy anything, Loretta. I just cleared out the rubbish." Harwick stepped forward. He held the paper toward her. She refused to take it, so he laid it carefully across her lap. "Ms. Miller." Harwick said, his voice professionally cold. "This is a formal notice to vacate. As legal representative of WP Holdings, owner of this property, I am informing you that your tenancy is terminated effective immediately. Loretta stared at the paper, then up at me. You are throwing me out. Her voice climbed in disbelief. I am an 80-year-old woman. Where am I supposed to go? I have no idea, Loretta, I said. And honestly, it is not my concern. Perhaps that budget facility Diane had picked out for me. I understand they have availability. Her mouth fell open. You have 60 minutes, Harwick said, glancing at his watch. You may take your personal clothing and toiletries. Anything purchased through Pruitt construction accounts remains here. If you have not left the premises by 1:00 hours, the sheriff's deputies waiting outside will remove you for trespassing. 60 minutes, she shrieked. That is simply not possible. Then I suggest you start moving, I said. I turned my back on her. I went to the window and looked out at the street below. The neighbors had emerged from their houses. They stood on their lawns watching as Garrett and Diane were loaded into the back of the police cars. The shame was entirely public. The humiliation was absolute. Behind me, I heard Loretta scrambling out of the chair, muttering vile things under her breath as she hauled herself toward the stairs. She was moving at a pace I had never seen from her before. Fear has a way of doing that. I stood at that window for the full hour. I listened to the sounds of the house being emptied, the frantic scrape of zippers, the dull thudding of suitcases being wrestled down the stairs. At 12:55, Loretta appeared in the hallway. She was dragging 2 large bags, sweating, her hair pulled loose and wild. She looked at me one final time. There was nothing in her eyes but hate, clean and undiluted. I hope you rot in this big, empty house, she spat. You will die alone. I looked back at her. A strange, settled calm moved through me. I would far rather die alone than spend another day living with snakes, I said. She huffed, dragged her bags out the door. Harwick followed to make certain she left the grounds. I watched her work her way down the driveway, a bitter old woman who had wagered everything on her daughter's greed and come away with nothing. When she reached the gate, Harwick closed it behind her. The automatic lock engaged with a clean click. It was done. The police cars were long gone. The neighbors had retreated back inside, their curiosity satisfied. The driveway sat empty. I turned back to face the room. It was in disarray. Champagne soaking into the rug, furniture shoved out of place, but the air felt different, lighter. The weight that had been sitting on my chest for months had simply lifted. Harwick came back inside. He looked at me and gave a single nod. They are gone, Walter. The house is yours. I looked around at the space. It was a big house, far too large for one man. But for the first time in years, it felt like it actually belonged to me. Not a fortress built from other people's expectations. A blank canvas. Thank you, Harwick, I said. What would you like to do now? He asked. I picked up the phone Diane had dropped and set it on the side table. I want to sit down, I said. I want to sit in my chair, the one at the head of the table. And I want to drink a cup of coffee that I paid for myself. Harwick smiled. I believe there's some in the kitchen. I walked into the dining room. I went to the chair at the head of the table, the one they had moved, and dragged it back where it belonged. I sat down. The solid wood held me. I was alone. My family was in custody. My marriage was finished. By any reasonable measure, I should have been shattered. But sitting there in the quiet, I understood something clearly. I had not lost a family. I had survived a disease. I had excised the infection before it took me under. I reached into my pocket and closed my hand around the $500 debit card. They had told me I amounted to nothing without them. They were wrong. I was worth everything. And I had the rest of my life ahead of me to demonstrate it. I shut my eyes and let out a slow, long breath. Checkmate. 3 months have passed since the morning the police cruisers came rolling down my driveway with their lights going. 3 months since the silence of an empty house first deafened me, only to give way to the quiet music of order and peace. I was sitting in my office at WP Holdings, the real one, the one perched high above the city like a watchtower. The view was something today. Below the park's trees were blazing gold and red, a reminder that even the process of falling apart can produce something beautiful. The door opened, and Clyde walked in. Not the cautious knock of the frightened people Garrett had hired. A confident knock, the knock of a man who knows he has earned his place. Clyde looked a full decade younger. The shadows that had lived beneath his eyes were gone, replaced by the alertness of a man working at something he cares about. He was back as CEO of Pruitt Construction, and in just 90 days he had reversed nearly all of the damage done. "Walter," he said, setting a report on my desk. "You are going to want to read this. We just landed the contract for the new hospital wing, and the bank has fully reinstated our credit rating. The bleeding is over." I smiled. A real smile, the kind that reaches your eyes. "Thank you, Clyde. I knew you had it in you. I never should have let you walk away." "I did not go very far, Walter," he said with a quiet laugh. "Just far enough to remember why I wanted to come back." He nodded toward the mug in my hand. "Is that from the fancy machine?" "No," I said, lifting the cup. "I walked down to the street. Bought it from the cart on the corner. $2. Cash." Clyde nodded, reading the meaning in it perfectly. "Best cup of coffee in the world, isn't it?" "It tastes like freedom, Clyde," I said. "It tastes like being in complete control of your own life." Clyde headed back to work, and I swiveled my chair toward the window to sit alone with my thoughts. I considered where the members of my family were at this moment. Garrett and Lacey were awaiting trial. Their attorneys were working to negotiate a plea, but the evidence Harwick had compiled was airtight. They were looking at 5 to 10 years. The villa in Tuscany would have to wait. The only Italian they would be learning was the brand name on the prison cafeteria's pasta. And then there was Diane. My wife, my ex-wife, as of the papers finalized last week. I opened my desk drawer and took out a manila envelope, a report from the private investigator I had kept on retainer. I needed to be certain she was not scheming from a distance. I needed confirmation that she understood the well had gone completely dry. I opened the folder. A photograph was clipped to the top of the report. It showed a woman in a pale blue uniform with an apron wiping down a table at a diner on the outskirts of the city. She looked exhausted. Her hair, once colored and styled on a weekly visit to the salon, was pulled back in a loose, untidy bun. Her nails, formerly long and lacquered, were trimmed short and bare. Diane was working as a waitress. I read through the report. She was living in a small studio above a garage. She took the bus to work every day. She spent her shifts serving eggs and coffee to truck drivers and laborers. I studied the photograph. A strange feeling moved through me. It was not pity. Pity assumes the person is a victim of things beyond their control. Diane was a victim of nothing but her own arrogance. She had possessed everything. A husband who loved her, a home, security, a life built on solid ground. And she threw every bit of it away because she wanted to watch me grovel. She told me I would have to come to her for money just to buy breakfast. She told me that without money, a man is nothing but noise. I reached for my checkbook. Not the company's, my personal one. The account that only I could touch. I uncapped my fountain pen, the same pen I had used to sign the eviction notice. I smoothed the check flat in front of me. Pay to the order of Diane Pruitt. I wrote the date. Then I filled in the amount with deliberate care. $500. I spelled it out on the line below. $500. The exact sum she had loaded onto that prepaid Visa card. The exact amount she had declared sufficient for a man to live on for a week. I tore the check free from the book. It made a clean, crisp sound. I took a sheet of my personal letterhead and wrote a short note. Not a letter. No inquiry about how she was getting on. No suggestion that I missed her. Just this: here is your allowance. Breakfast is on me. Don't spend it all on wine. I folded the check inside. The note slid it into an envelope and sealed it. I pressed my thumb against the flap and held it there a moment, feeling the finality of it. I reached for the intercom. Elspeth, would you come in for a moment? My new assistant, a sharp young woman putting herself through law school, stepped through the door. Yes, Mr. Pruitt. Please see that this gets mailed, I said, placing the envelope in her hand. I'm certified mail. I want confirmation that she receives it in person. Of course, she said, taking it. Anything else? No, Elspeth, I said. That will be all. She left. I leaned back in my chair. I pictured Diane receiving the envelope. I pictured her recognizing the return address. I pictured her pulling it open with unsteady hands, hoping for reconciliation, hoping for some opening back into the life she had thrown away. And then I pictured her unfolding the check. $500 and 8 words. It was petty, I did not pretend otherwise, but it was also necessary. It was the final punctuation at the end of a long and painful sentence. It was my way of making clear that the arrangement between us had shifted permanently. I was no longer the one begging. I was the one writing the check, and she was finally learning what a dollar actually means. I took another sip of my coffee. It had gone cold. It did not matter. There was warmth enough inside me. I looked around the office. Quiet. For a long time, that quiet had frightened me. I had believed that silence meant loneliness, that a house full of people, even people who despised me, was better than an empty one. I was wrong. Silence is not emptiness. It is full of answers. It is full of peace. I picked up the phone and dialed Clyde. Clyde, I said. Yes, Walter. That hospital wing project, I said. Let's double the donation to the pediatric center. Double it, Clyde asked. That is a significant amount of money, Walter. I know, I said, looking at the vacant spot on my desk where the family photograph used to stand. But I have come to understand something, Clyde. Money is like water. Dam it up and it goes stagnant. Let it move and it gives life. I want mine to build things, not to ruin people. I understand, Walter, Clyde said quietly. I will get the paperwork drawn up. I set the phone down. I rose from the chair and walked to the window one last time. The sun was going down, spreading a deep gold across the city of Houston. I was 72 years old. I was single. My son was behind bars. My ex-wife was waiting tables. By any conventional measure, my personal life was in ruins. But as I watched the city's lights begin to come on one by one, what I felt was not grief. It was a deep and settled gratitude. I had my dignity, I had my clarity, I had my company, and above all else, I had the truth. I was not a freeloader. I was not a confused old man. I was Walter Pruitt. I was a builder. And I was only just beginning my most important project. A life conducted entirely on my own terms. The lion was not sleeping. If you made it to the end of this one, then you know exactly what it cost to get here, and what it felt like when the scales finally balanced. I spent a long time wondering how a man rebuilds after the people he gave everything to tried to take everything from him. What I found on the other side of all of it is that losing what was false is not really a loss at all. It is a clearing. I believe God does not allow those seasons of betrayal without a purpose behind them. The pain had a point. It burned away what was hollow and left only what was solid. That is not a small thing. If this story taught me anything worth passing along here, is what I would say to you. First, never confuse loyalty with passivity. The people who love you should not require you to shrink yourself to keep the peace. Second, document everything. When trust begins to crack, your records are the only voice that cannot be argued with. Third, if someone tells you what you are worth through their actions, their words, or the allowance they put you on, believe them. And then decide whether that is the life you are willing to accept. Fourth, the quiet you are afraid of is not empty. Sit in it long enough, and you will find out who you actually are without the noise. If this story moved something in, you leave a comment below and tell me what landed hardest. And if you know someone who is carrying a weight like Walter's, a parent, a friend, anyone who has been made to feel small in their own home, share this with them. It might be exactly what they need to hear today. Thank you for spending this time with me here on Dad Revenge. I do not take it lightly that you chose to listen. Until next time, take care of yourself, and don't let anyone dim what you have built.